A short announcement before we start. Those who have given names for the lightning talk, please assemble near the flipboard after the QA session of Keynote session. So now we waited and waited and waited. Finally, she's here. Let's wait no more. Our keynote speaker, Jessica McKellar. She is an entrepreneur, software engineer, and open source developer from San Francisco, California, USA. She is a former director for the Python Software Foundation, Python North America's Diversity Outreach Chair, and a maintainer for several open source projects, including OpenHash and the Twisted event-driven networking engine. For her outreach efforts in Python community, she was awarded the O'Reilly Open Source Award in 2013. So a warm welcome to her for Sweden, PyCon Sweden.
Hi, everyone.
Give her a big hand.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for your patience with me. I'm very glad that I was actually finally able to physically get to Sweden and to Stockholm to be here. So thank you all so much. This is a talk on breaking the rules. And for just a little bit more on me, I have spent a lot of my adult life caring about the Python community. So I was a director for the Python Software Foundation for several years. I have been the PyCon North America's diversity chair for several years. Back when I was living in Boston, I was an organizer for the Boston Python user group. And there was a period where we were making a very concerted effort to increase the diversity of that user group. And in doing so, that group actually grew to become the largest Python user group in the world. I've also used Python in every job that I've ever had, so it's very important to me that Python and the Python community stay strong, because this is really the only thing that I know how to do, and I'd like to be able to keep doing it. And this includes a startup called Caseflice that had a technology for rebootless kernel updates on Linux. It had a Python desktop client. I was part of a startup that built a real-time group collaboration service, sort of like Slack before Slack existed. It was sort of a monster hybrid of Django and Tornado and a lot of other Python technologies. And I'm currently a director of engineering at Dropbox. Dropbox may be the largest sort of user-facing desktop client installation in the world. Over 300 million people have installed the Dropbox desktop client, and it is all written in Python. And Guido is a neighbor at work. So I use Python every day, and I care a lot about and have invested a lot of time in this community. But I have a secret to tell you, which is that the reason that I do all of this was never actually about Python. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that over the course of this talk. So this is a talk about systems. And in particular, it's a talk about learning the rules and then breaking the rules. And we're going to talk about this through the lens of Python in a couple of ways. We're going to talk about learning to program. We're going to give a brief history of Python. We're going to talk about free software. We're going to talk about free people. And that will explain why it is that I am actually here today, and in particular, why I'm so invested in teaching new people how to program. But first, let's warm up. Please raise your hand if you have started learning to program for the first time within the past year. Anyone in this room? Yeah, no, this is great. Awesome. I'm so glad that you're here. Great. Raise your hand if you have contributed to a free and open source software project. Oh, that's beautiful. That's great. That's, I mean, most people in this room. Folks who haven't, you have some really excellent neighbors to work with if you want to have that experience, which is a really powerful one. And then a final question for you. Raise your hand if you can remember, and like take yourself back, remember. Raise your hand if you remember what it felt like the time you realized that you had mastered something. And this could have been Python, this could have been like a foreign language, it could have been knowing exactly what to say to get your mom to give you the candy bar. I don't care what it was, but what you realized you had mastered a system. And I ask about this because that feeling is actually really important, is a really important part of the story for us today together. I want to tell you a little bit about my mastery story with Python to get us into the context on this. This is me, circa 1987. It's the acid wash jeans heyday in the Bay Area in California. And I have a little pink lunchbox because I am so excited to go to school. And that is pretty much me for the rest of my life, actually. And then sort of somehow I get to this point where I'm very involved in the Python community. I'm speaking at a lot of conferences. But I am not actually one of those like childhood programmer wonderkind. I did not actually start learning how to program until I was in college. When I was younger, I thought I was going to be a chemist. And actually, my first degree is in chemistry. And I didn't start learning how to program until I was in university, and I had a bunch of friends who were learning how to program. And I was going through this undergraduate chemistry degree program, learning all the reactions, doing all the lab work. And I had all of these friends who were pursuing computer science degrees, and I would sort of watch them out of the corner of my eye. And I saw what they were learning, and I saw what I was learning. And what I was learning was very cool, but what I noticed about what my friends in computer science programs were learning is that they were learning a toolkit full of tools for solving arbitrary problems in the world. Software really applies in any discipline, right? You're going to use software to solve many of today's problems in the world, be it biotech or so the next generation of political activists or whatever it is, software is probably going to be involved. And I could see them learning this toolkit full of tools, and that was very exciting to me. And I decided that I wanted to have that experience too. And I started taking computer science classes. And I fell in love, and I ended up loving it so much that I ended up getting a bachelor's degree and then a master's degree. And the rest is really history. But that means I got started in college. And I have a very distinct set of memories about not having mastered programming. And in particular, sort of being a novice when a lot of my friends had done this for a very long time. And feeling this urgent need to catch up because I wanted to feel like I had a mastery over this system so that I could do whatever I wanted with it. And I've retained that with me to this day, and I think that is part of why, that's one of the pieces of why I end up paying a lot of attention to beginners, is I sort of retain within me that feeling of being a beginner when nobody else was when I was in school. But I did get to that point, and I remember sitting sort of at my desk one day and needing to solve a new problem in Python and realizing that I just knew how to do it. Like, I realized that I had mastered the system, I knew the rules, I knew how to apply them, and that was a really profound feeling for me. And then I also had the experience a couple of years later of being able to change the system when I contributed my first open source patch. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So that's where I'm coming from when we talk about mastery. Because when you master something, once you learn the rules, you learn when to break them or when you can break them. So that's good. That's a setup for this 4-part journey. We're going to talk about learning to program, a brief history of Python, free software, and free people. So learning to program. And there are a lot of ways that we could talk about this. This is the way that resonated with me. There are many ways to model skill acquisition, but this one, this is a popular one, and I remember myself going through these. When you're a novice, it's all about learning what the rules are and then following the rules to a T. When you are learning Python, you are going to forget to indent, and the most important thing in your life is going to be to remember that colon, and then the return, and the indent, so that your dang for loop works without a syntax error, right? You're going to learn the rules, and you're going to follow the rules. Okay, this is how you use a Python dictionary. That is what it means to be a novice. As you keep working on this stuff, and I remember, gosh, I'm a sophomore in college, you develop situational perception, pattern matching. Oh, I have seen this situation before. I know from what I've seen before that I should use a dictionary in this case. You develop competence. I want to be competent in most things in my life. You learn how to plan based on these rules that you've learned. You learn how to you have a problem that you want to solve, and you can break it down into pieces and apply the rules to each of these pieces. I am solving this problem, and as a part of solving this problem, I will need a dictionary in this place. And then you become proficient. You know the why. You know the why of the rules. And then you become an expert. And here's what's exciting about becoming an expert. You don't rely on the rules anymore. You know what is possible, and you can change the rules if you need to get done what you need to get done. To solve this problem, I need a data structure with the following properties. If I know about one, I will use it. If I need to learn about one, I will do that. If I need to adapt or to create a data structure that will solve this problem, I can do that too, because I am an expert, I am fluent in this system. And that is an exciting place to be as a programmer. And we can up-level this, right? We were just talking about becoming proficient in something, mastering learning how to program. But when you get to this expert spot, you know that you can change the rules. Let's talk about changing the rules. In the context of Python to start, let's talk about changing the rules. Through a brief history of Python, programming has rules, but you can change them. One more sort of hand raise. Raise your hand if you used Python before 2005. My nerd husband is raising his hand. Excellent. Okay, there are like a fair bit of you. Great. Okay, Python before 2005, it's not really, it wasn't a great language for a while. It took a while to get to it being this thing that we know and love, and people are nodding like they remember the bad old days. Let's just remind ourselves of what it means to have a set of rules and to learn them and become fluent and then to break them to make them better. 1989, Python is born. It is inspired by, in particular, a couple of languages, ABC, which gave us these white space delimited blocks, this philosophy that being a compelling teaching language is an important part of getting the language adopted, also inspired by Modula 3. 1994, Python 1.1 was a milestone release because you could use something other than a string for your dictionary key. Also, you could have double quotes around strings and other things that we take for granted as being extremely basic properties of the language. No keyword arguments until 95, 1.3. No real exceptions, no standard exceptions until 98. Python 1.6 is when we got Unicode support. My favorite language feature, this is everybody's language feature, but my favorite language feature, list comprehensions, did not exist until Python 2.0. Everything before then was a real bummer. Pygame was released. 2.1, 2.2, iterators. Did you know that there were not Booleans in Python until 2003? No Booleans. Also the first official PyCon ever. Python 2.3 in 2003. A bunch of other good stuff. Function decorators, generator expressions. A bunch of really important pieces of evolution of the language, but also a bunch of really important contributions to the ecosystem. Oh, this web thing is pretty important. We need a compelling framework for developing websites in Python. Oh, Python is too slow. No, I reject that as a rule of the system. PyPy comes into existence. It's a long play. It took 10 years for PyPy to not suck. But it was based on the belief that we reject the notion that Python has to be too slow. And more evolution over the years. So this language has changed a lot. The ecosystem has changed a lot over the past decade. And it's not because of magic. It's because some people saw the rules and they decided they wanted to change them. They contributed patches to this open source Python, to this open source project, this open source language, to make the language do what it needed to do, to build up a set of libraries that would make this community compelling. So programming has rules, but you can change the rules. And let's abstract that out a little bit. Like, I say this, and you're like, well, I mean, duh. I know that I can contribute to Python. But it's worth not taking for granted that this was not always the case, and this is not the case, or it is not just taken for granted in many other contexts. So why do we just get to make changes to Python? Well, it's rooted in a couple of traditions, but I would say that a nice, succinct encapsulation of these traditions is the tenets of free software. And most people have probably seen these before. Just to recap them, the tenets are that you have the freedom to run the program as you wish for any purpose. You can study how a program works. You can change it so that it does what you want it to do. You can help your neighbor. You can redistribute copies so you can help your neighbor, and you can distribute copies of your modified versions to others. So this idea that you have a system that you can study and you can debug and you can change and you can share those changes with the world, it's like deeply embedded in our traditions as software engineers in an open source community. But the interesting thing for me is why frequently folks stop there. We forget that we have this really nice set of rules, and they're nice because they're really explicit. It is nice that programming languages are a set of rules, and it's nice that we have this framework that tells you that you can change the rules, but we forget sometimes that we have the power to do this in other places. And that's really what I want to talk about today. The reason why I invest in communities like the Python community, and the reason why I teach beginners, is that programming changes the way that you think about and debug and interact with the world. And that is a very profound experience to have. Programmers have the experience, we all in this room have had or in the process of having the experience of mastering a system that you know you can change. This is sort of the easy version. You are mastering a system that you know that you can change. But if you step back, if you're willing to step back and say, okay, but everything is a system, everything that's important, everything that's worth fighting for is a system, even if nobody told you the rules, nobody told you that you can change them, that is still true, and you've done it once before. At least once before, because you've done that while programming. So it's true that programming has rules, but really almost anything has rules, and that is the insight that I want more people to have as they learn how to program. So there are software systems, and we know that we can change these systems because we're rooted in this open source tradition that tells us that's true. There are hardware systems that come out of a very similar set of traditions. We know that we can hack on an Arduino. We know that we can play with the hardware and make it do what we want. But the most interesting systems, well, in my opinion, the most interesting systems are people systems, right? And nobody's ever going to tell you that these are systems, and nobody's ever going to tell you what the rules are. But the reason why interesting changes happen in the world is because people decided they were going to change something whether or not anybody told them that they could. And that is important to me. That's why I start with this kid, right? That's why I work with the PSF to support initiatives like these. This is why I teach people to program, because I truly believe this. I truly believe that programming changes the way that you think about and debug and interact with the world. I truly believe that for many people, this is their first experience mastering a system that they know that they change, and once you've done it once, you know that you can do it again. So programming has rules, everything has rules, and my call to action for you, coming out of this very rich series of talks, coming out of being in a room full of people who have all had this experience together of mastering a system and being able to change it, my call to action is to up-level that way of thinking about the world to apply it to some other system that you care about. So I actually want you to do this. Think, and this might take more than a couple of minutes, but think as you go through the rest of the conference, as you're on the tram home today, as you're on an airplane, think about a system that you care about. And it could be a small system. It could be the Python ecosystem. It could be a big system. It could be in your physical local community. It could be in an online community that you care about. It could be something related to teaching. It could be something related to the politics that you care about. I don't care what it is. The important part is that we collectively, as open source programmers, get in the habit of realizing the power that we have to change other systems than just the software that we use. So please, identify a system that you care about, write it down so you don't forget, and so you actually have thought about it. Learn the rules, break the rules, and then make the change that you want to see in that system, the change that you want to see in the world. And if every one of us did this, there are about 300 people who've attended this conference. If each one of us did that, actually did it, that would represent a significant change. And this is also, it's a little bit habit forming. Like if you do it once, you end up doing it again. So I really do encourage you to see if you're willing to commit to this exercise, pick a thing that you want to change and go out and do it. And then let's come back and check in next year, 2017, and see what changes we had. So that is my pitch to you. Thank you all so much for taking the time to attend PyCon Sweden. Thanks for waiting for me. Can I answer any questions?
Questions?
Thank you for your talk. It seems like diversity is finally becoming more mainstream, and that a lot of people are accepting along these lines of making the change, but having specific steps to do would go a long way for people to actually do something. And I was wondering if you could speak specifically to what attendees here today could actually do specifically.
Sure. So, I mean, if the system that you care about is diversity in an open source community, is that an okay way of scoping it?
Yeah, that's one of my, I mean, the other thing is like my son, he's big to, but it's my more public passion, yeah.
Cool. Okay, yeah, and again, because this could, I can't prescribe a set of, like a path through every system that anybody might care about. This happens to be one. So diversity in open source communities happens to be a particular system that I care quite a bit about. Like, what are the ways to affect change? Well, there are a couple of ways we could talk about this, and you and I could talk for hours about it probably. In a nutshell, like, how does anything get done? You set a goal, you set ways to measure if you're succeeding with that goal, and then you execute against a plan, and then you see if the metrics moved. So the first thing to do, I would say, is to set a specific set of measurable goals, and then you do whatever it takes to hit them. And like, what is whatever it takes? If it were possible to write down a set of steps that one would take to have like 50-50 speakers at a conference, that would have been written down before, and everybody would be following it. I can tell you a statistic about PyCon North America, which might be helpful. So PyCon North America is happening in a couple of weeks in Portland, Oregon, and 41% of the speakers are women. This is through no magic. It's completely boring. The way that you do this is you have to do a couple of things. Step 0 is you have to have an equitable evaluation process for speakers. And you can only know this if you measure the pipeline statistics across the demographics that you care about, and you prove to yourself that they're equitable. Step 1 is you have to have an environment that diverse folks actually want to be in. So this might involve, and this depends on where you are in the world and the culture of the community that we're talking about, this might include things like a code of conduct, support, like childcare support, financial aid, things like that. But you ask and you get feedback, and then you ensure, again, like you probably have to ask people and measure it, that you've created an environment that diverse speakers actually want to be in. And if you do those two things, it becomes a numbers game. So you have a top of the funnel, and then you have a bottom of the funnel. And what you want is what comes at the bottom of the funnel to be a diverse set of speakers. That means the top of the funnel needs to be diverse as well. And then you just do a lot of work. So I can show you my email inbox from getting speakers to submit talks for PyCon, and my inbox from that time period during the call for proposals is literally, and I can send you screenshots, it's literally me having personally reached out to about 250 women who had spoken at other Python conferences. And there was a me doing this, but then there were also a bunch of other people doing this. And if you do that, and you have an equitable evaluation pipeline, it's just a numbers game. And it's like reaching out to enough diverse folks to fill that top of the funnel in a diverse way. And what that really comes down to is putting in the work and it being a priority for the organizing team to do the work. But that's all it is. It's not magic. It's creating an inclusive culture, having an equitable evaluation pipeline, and then putting in the work at the top of the funnel. And that is about as much of a blueprint as I think is possible. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Cool. Other systems that people want to talk about? What change are you going to have in the world this year? I can tell you one thing that I'm doing. I am, for the first time ever, because I've never had this experience, in the United States, it's an election year. You might have heard about that. And I'm going to be running a polling station. So one of the places where you go to vote in the presidential election, I will be running one of those. And it will be my job to ensure that it is a fair and accessible democratic experience for everybody. And that is one part of how I'm participating in that process, because it's important to me.
I'm also very excited about teaching beginners, and I was kind of curious what you're doing or looking at doing that excites you in that area as far as methods for teaching.
Methods for teaching, interesting. I have so much that I could say on this. So, I mean, the thing that I am personally doing right now is I am producing a set of video tutorials, which has been an interesting way. This happens to me with O'Reilly, but it's been an interesting way for me to engage with that medium as an experiment in teaching first-time programmers. I think my belief, and one of the reasons why I'm running this experiment, is that I haven't seen a lot of success with anything besides in-person teaching, and that's like very interesting, because you want to be able to teach effectively at scale if you have a really good set of material, and you want to be able to reach people who can't necessarily get to you in person. So that's like a set of experiments that I am running in that particular way, and that's the thing that I'm excited about. But it sounds like there's like a second, there's like an aspect to this that you want to get into. Oh, you can shout. Is it? Yeah.
Teaching kids, and one of the things that's really exciting me in that area is like the Sphero and playing around with like physical stuff for kids. I was just wondering if you were doing anything in that sort of area, or thinking about it, or
so I'm not personally working on that, but I have seen some amazing. There's like one day a year that code.org says is spend an hour in the classroom coding day or whatever. And I went to a public, like an elementary school in Boston, Massachusetts 2 years ago. And this classroom had a bunch of stuff laid out for getting kids excited about programming. They had little robots, they had like programming stations, they had a bunch of other stuff. And every student in the classroom was glued to a Minecraft screen. And that was the thing that everybody wanted to do. They wanted to play with Minecraft, and they wanted to learn how to program Minecraft. So that is for some reason really resonating with kids. That's one observation that I have. And then there are a bunch of people who think about this, and the Python Software Foundation can help connect people who are interested in educating kids with other educators and with material. If you email psf@python.org, they can definitely direct you to the right people. Oh, am I picking? Oh, geez, too much pressure.
I have an almost similar question, but this time it's not about kids, which maybe are not aware of their own limitations, but about adults who think that I can't do this, and while they're obviously competent to do it, but they have absolutely zero confidence. How do you deal with that?
Is it getting people that you know in your life to actually learn how to program, or like how do you teach adults more generally?
It's getting them to program. They want to learn how to program because they have a need for it and they think it's cool.
Yeah.
But they fear that they don't have the prerequisites, or they don't know this or that.
Here's my honest answer to that, is that most material out there does a terrible job of introducing first-time programmers to programming, and that's why they think they can't do it, because it's terrifying the way that it's presented. I've given a talk on this before. You try to, as an experiment someday, like pretend that you were a first-time programmer and you want to learn how to program in Python, and you go to python.org and you want to figure out how to do that. And it will like blow your mind how crazy this is. So what happens is you click on a couple of links, and already you're like a little nervous that it wasn't super obvious how to do this, and you end up on a wiki that gives you a list of like 100 potential resources for learning how to program, and then you click on one of them, and it like expects you to be fluent with command line navigation and a bunch of other stuff that you probably don't know how to do if you're a first-time programmer. So my real answer to that is we need to do a better job as a community in our official resources, but also just in the way that we think about helping beginners with actually starting at the beginning. And a lot of the beginning is not about Python, it's about your environment setup. On Windows. Because the thing is that nobody ever uses Windows except that everybody uses Windows. Like if you're a developer, you don't use Windows, but then the rest of the planet uses Windows. And so we don't do them justice with the sort of ease of environment setup.
Any more questions?
Yeah, even at the mic. I'm interested about diversity since, I mean, when we talk about diversity in the open source community, we talk about women and being a woman, and often being the only woman in the room, that's something I appreciate. But that's not the only type of diversity.
Definitely.
And yeah, I was wondering your thoughts, or what's the Python Software Foundation thoughts or actions?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, I think that if you are stewards of an open source community, if you are leaders at a software company, pick any other number of contexts, you want the people developing the community and developing the software to be reflective of the communities that they're serving, because that's the best way to ensure that you are actually building the thing that your users want, that does a good job of serving them. So diversity really means on a bunch of axes, like more axes than one could really easily enumerate. The thing that's interesting about women at being a focus in open source communities, in software communities, is number one, women are about half the planet, so they're a very obvious large segment of the population to target. And the second thing is, and people get this wrong, it is comparatively easy to decide if someone quote unquote is a woman or not when you are trying to come up with metrics for this stuff. And that's a whole separate thing that is like a nuanced discussion about gender identity. But if you're at step 0 of caring about diversity, picking a population that's about half of the world and that is comparatively easy to develop metrics around, it totally makes sense why that's the first one, right? And then the question is, once you get good at that, if you use that as really, I think what's happening in these communities right now is they're using that as a testing ground for the things that we talked about earlier, which is, did you actually do a good job of setting up an inclusive environment that people want to be a part of? And are you equitable in your treatment of these folks? In your local user groups, in the speaker evaluation process, things like that. And once you do those things, you get good at doing those things, it becomes easier to apply them to other demographics. So I think the thing that has started happening, and will increasingly happen, is that people will have or communities will have developed the expertise, really, as it were, to be doing more concerted outreach to other demographics as well. I think in software in corporate software communities, the next step has been underrepresented ethnic minorities. And that has been the next set of metrics that people are sort of able to wrap their heads around. But at the end of the day, it goes back to sort of the statement earlier, which is you want to have a community that is reflective of the populations that you're serving, and that means everything. That means age, background, the diversity of experiences that all the many facets of one's life brings to being a part of the community. Yeah?
Oh, thank you. As someone who's not only involved in the Python community, I'm also in the GNOME community. And for a number of years now, we've had the outreach program, which many of you have heard about, and even more have probably been flamed about, because it's the amount of vitriol and anger we've met from there. There's a reason that I have the title Social Justice Aficionado on my title talks, because that's basically what I've been harassed with. Now that it's no longer the outreach program for women, it's no longer the GNOME outreach program, it's Outreachy, and we're trying to involve quite a lot of other people in different parts of the world. The last couple of years we've been doing outreach program in Bangalore and other places of the world, which mostly has been around the social problems for the groups to actually reach out and be part of the community. So from that point, as a pretty standard, straight-up white male who's standing there in front of people talking, getting that hate and anger in second hand, how do you cope with all the trolls?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess thank you for the work that you're doing in these various communities.
I'm not that active in doing it. I shall not take that praise, but I am fully supporting them.
Sure. I don't know that there's a general answer to this. How do you... Your question was how do you deal with the trolls? In general, how do you sort of take care of yourself while committing yourself to these communities that you care about? I think it depends on the person. here's one thing that I would say that's maybe useful. It's important to, actually going back to systems, it's important to set up systems that are sustainable over time. So you don't have a good system if it's like you have the one magic person with superpowers who like runs the diversity program or who runs the conference, who runs the user group, and if they get hit by a bus, like the community is gonna die, right? That's not what a sustainable system looks like. So a part of doing this should be building up a robust set of people who know how to mentor the next generation that's going to support this system in a way that makes it sustainable. This includes writing down best practices and teaching them effectively. Like that is a big part of making this stuff sustainable. And I think that's pretty general. Again, I can't speak to sort of the individual psychologies of the people involved, but the more that we can focus on building sustainable communities and sustainable organizations, the better off we'll all be.
Any more questions?
Thanks, Jessica, for a really interesting talk and the following discussion. So the question is, do you see any way to change the bureaucratic system? It's actually related to education and IT education in my case, because in my previous life, I was actually working at the university and teaching students the programming languages and Python as well. But we were forced to actually teach them other languages, which I personally see not very suitable, not that modern and so on, and not inspiring for students. But I had to sit on two chairs at the same time because I wanted to do what I really see is much beneficial for the students and to somehow conform their requirements. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so let's see what is good to talk about this question. So you said bureaucracy, and we could substitute in a bunch of other really important words, right? Another word that is important would be something like the political machine, or the educational institutions, or the way the media works, or like all of these things are really important, and ultimately we need, like, the reason why I talk about stuff like this and why I want as many people as possible to believe that they can change the system is at the end of the day, some people have to be willing to do it, right? One of the things that's interesting for me living in Silicon Valley in San Francisco is software engineers are comparatively like a well-off group of people. We're pretty privileged, we're pretty entitled. We're surprisingly disengaged with other important systems for how much privilege and how many resources we have. And for me, that's really sad, and it's a real waste of what could be a lot of like power for good. Like at the end of the day, people have to care and they want to be a part of changing the system, both from the inside and from the outside, and you need both. Like I don't have an answer to like the bureaucracy in the educational system that you're involved with, but it does require some people like saying, hey, this is the thing that I'm gonna do, like I'm gonna commit to being a part of change on the inside. One of the things that I spend a lot of time paying attention to in the United States is the Black Lives Matter movement. There's a person who I spent a lot of time paying attention to. His name is DeRay McKesson, and he's sort of Twitter famous, and he's one of the, he's just a prominent person in the Black Lives Matter community. And a thing that he did this year is he ran to be the mayor of Baltimore. And I'm sure that job is very hard, doesn't pay well enough for how hard it is. And he could be doing a lot of other things, but he decided that he was going to turn his activism into being a part of the political process. And there were people working on the outside, but he was going to be one of the people who attempted to work from the inside. Like, as it turns out, he didn't win that election. He's got a lot of really interesting sort of discussion about what was challenging about doing that. But like, you need people like him who are going to commit to working from the inside. And for him, he's been like very inspirational to me because I spend a lot of time thinking about ways that I can work on the inside and on the outside as someone who is primarily a software engineer, or if I need to be doing something else to have the impact that I want to have in these areas that I care about. Sort of a long-winded answer, but I'm providing some color on how I think about these things.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you all so much for coming to the conference. Thank you to the organizers. Have we had a recent thank you to them? Thank you, organizers. Yes. I hope you leave the conference enriched, with new friends, inspired, do something great in the world in 2016. And I think the next thing that's up is lighting talks, yeah? Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.